Good day, everyone. I am Mr. Edelon Liwag. I will be your topic instructor for environmental health hazard. The main objective of this topic are the following. Name the different environmental hazards. As you all know, environmental hazards are actually not new to us. In fact, we experience them from day to day, and there are a lot of times that we unconsciously think of them, but actually they are actually part of our day-to-day living. Second is to discuss how certain component of environmental hazards can increase the risk of human injury, diseases, or death. As we go along, we will discuss the different types of environmental hazards that are actually what you call this dangerous in such a sense that it can cause injury, diseases, or death in our day-to-day activities. Third is to describe the community health efforts to control or reduce health risks caused by these environmental hazards. When we say control or reduce, we would in some form or another mitigate the effects of environmental hazards in our day-to-day activities. So let me start by defining what is environmental health. So environmental health, according to the World Health Organization, comprises those aspects of human health, including quality of life that are determined by physical, chemical, biologic, social, and psychosocial factors in the environment. Social and psychosocial are more or less synonymous, and in a sense that person cannot socialize without even thinking of it. Environmental health is also defined as any external factor that negatively affects our health, no, which can be considered as unsafe or an unsafe condition. So as part of the introduction, in developing countries with large rural population, people continue to suffer from traditional risk. This according to the World Health Organization, wherein there are a lot of people living in unsafe environment, wherein they do not have access to water, they do not have access to adequate sanitation and hygiene, and sometimes the environment is detrimental to their health, primarily because of the presence of smoke coming from domestic cooking, heating, transportation, heavy machinery industry, and the like. So that the scientists believe that in developing countries with large urban populations, more industries are being developed, people are exposed to additional environmental risk. As what I have told you, due to a lot of automobiles that are present in the cities, huge industries are being created, therefore they produce a lot of pollutants in the air. Farms utilize herbicides, pesticides to control the effects of the destruction of the insects and other organisms that may destroy the crops, which in other times can be or can have a negative effect on the environment. More recently, because of these human activities that we tend to develop in the name of progress, there is a concern about the health impact of changes in climate and ecosystem, which I guess most of us is experiencing right now. So that, what are the different types of environmental health hazards that we are exposed to? Number one, land and climate related hazards, atmospheric hazards, water related hazards, foodborne hazards, vector-borne hazards, domestic hazards, occupational hazards in our workplace, infrastructural hazards that we encounter in our day-to-day activities, as we go out and do our stuff daily on a daily basis, and others or miscellaneous hazards that we will be discussing along the way. So let's start off with land and climate related hazards. So what is land and climate related hazards? These are hazards that are not new to us. In fact, this type of hazards have been going on for several years in our planet, long before we were born. These hazards are commonly known as floods, storms, hurricanes, volcanic activity, earthquakes, soil erosion, including drought. Well, the negative impact of these land and climate related hazards have continuously became a problem for communities. However, the positive impact is that they change the surface of the earth, intended primarily to preserve the existence of life. We may very well know that volcanic activity is a very dangerous thing, primarily because it does not only destroy communities, but it can cause destruction of wildlife and even death. However, on the other side, volcanic activity, if you see it, if you see it in a positive way, is actually a means to revive the earth, to make the land fertile again. And that is the very reason why we have volcanic activities. All of these things, land and climate related hazards, are phenomenons that cannot be stopped. There are times wherein we may wish that these things never happened. However, this is part of the environment that we live in. And we must live with them. And in order to live with them, we must learn how to not actually control them, but to mitigate their impact. So I guess you realize that even earthquakes are unstoppable, storms are unstoppable, hurricanes can never be put on halt, not even soil erosion or even drought. They come and go, part of our daily existence. So let's start off with atmospheric hazards. Okay, so what are atmospheric hazards? Atmospheric hazards are of two forms. We have outdoor pollution and indoor pollution. So atmospheric hazards, such as in the case of outdoor pollution, will increase the problem in many urban areas due to road traffic. The primary cause of outdoor pollution or atmospheric hazard is actually automobiles. Not only automobiles, but even industries, machineries that pollutes the air, in our atmosphere. They are also associated with old, heavy, and manufacturing industries, as what I have told you, including automobiles, including mining, that produces dust as they tend to scrape the deepest part of the Earth's crust in order to remove precious ores that are used for industry, which can also cause significant problems, primarily because the dust that they produce are usually blown out into some other areas of our community. So that what are the sources of outdoor pollution? You have industry, as what I have told you, industry such as power plants, coal power plants, nuclear power plants, and the like. Vehicles, for one, is the primary source of outdoor pollution because of the emissions of cars and trucks that usually pollutes the air. Other sources such as gasoline stations, farm equipments, fires, and even pesticides used. So this is actually a picture of the sum total of the things that we will be talking about atmospheric hazard. So you have here the pollutant emission or the gases or the pollutants that they emit, coming from the natural phenomenon such as eruption of volcanoes, wildfires. Cities, for one, will contribute due to outdoor and indoor pollutants. Livestock will also communicate, or I'm sorry, will also contribute to pollutant emissions because of the use of fertilizers, the manures that the animals produce from time to time will also contribute to pollutant emission. The extraction of oil and gas because of the refineries can also contribute to pollutant emission. Power industry or power plant, sewage treatment plants, nuclear power plants will also contribute to the emission of pollutants in the atmosphere, including airplanes, automobiles, motorcycles, buses, and the like. So what are the primary outdoor air pollutants that we encounter from time to time? Remember, these are the things that you cannot see or you cannot even smell, but they are present in the atmosphere. And sometimes, majority of these pollutants are even found in our own household. We tend to use them from time to time, such as ozone, suspended particulate matter, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, lead, and volatile organic compounds. So let's start with ozone. What are ozone? Ozones are highly reactive irritating gas with an unpleasant odor that forms in the troposphere. They are a major component of what you call a photochemical smog. And I guess you're familiar what smog is all about. Smog is something that we encounter from day to day when we go out and do our daily activities. When we see the horizon that is usually hazy or sometimes cloudy, that we cannot even see what is beyond the horizon because of a blurred smoke that is covering it, is what you call a smog. So a photochemical smog is a chemical reaction activated by light. This is a mixture of more than 100 primary and secondary pollutants formed under the influence of sunlight. Majority of this is caused by the emission of automobiles. Suspended particulate matter. So suspended particulate matter is a variety of small and light particles, and sometimes they form aerosols or droplets that are usually suspended in the atmosphere. The sources of this suspended particulate matter are either natural or anthropogenic. Natural in the sense that they originate from volcanoes, dust storms, forest and grassland fires, or even in living vegetation and in sea spray. Anthropogenic particulates originate from burning fossil fuel, such as in the extraction of oil and gas, or in coal power plants. Incinerating waste and smelting metals is also one form that contributes to the emission of suspended particulate matter in the atmosphere. Another hazard is the presence of carbon monoxide in our atmosphere. No? Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas that is usually poisonous to us when we inhale them. Remember, they are colorless and odorless. So you do not or you cannot even know that you have already inhaled them. They are formed as a result of incomplete combustion of carbon-containing fuels. Remember, the danger to carbon dioxide is that they prevent our red blood cells to accept oxygen. And in return, what happens? The health effect is that you will die of asphyxiation. Asphyxiation in a sense that you will die due to lack of oxygen. Okay, so what are the sources of carbon monoxide emission in the atmosphere? Well, for one, chimney, furnaces, automobiles, fireplace, water heater, indoor grilling, range hoods, clothes dryer, and portable heater. These are the potential sources of carbon monoxide. And one last thing, according to the World Health Organization, even cigarette smoking is also a potential source of carbon monoxide. Secondhand smoke. Another gas that is emitted in the atmosphere that is considered to be a pollutant is nitrogen oxide. Nitrogen oxide is a combination of gases composed primarily of nitric acid, nitrogen dioxide, and nitrous oxide. It is actually a reddish-brown irritating gas that gives photochemical smog its brownish color. That is the reason why if you see a smog in the horizon, tendency is that it will be hazy, and sometimes it would be difficult for you to see what is beyond the horizon. This nitrogen oxide can be converted to nitric acid, and it becomes a major component of acid deposition, or also known as acid rain. So what is an acid rain or acid deposition? An acid deposition or acid rain is actually brought about by the conversion of pollutant gases such as nitrogen oxide into nitric acid. Nitric acid is then being returned to Earth by means of a rain. And in the end, the water that comes out from the rain becomes acidic to nature. Acidic to nature in a sense that it can cause rust, especially in metals. It can lead to the destruction of the ecosystem, primarily because, like for example, in a body of water, the body of water becomes acidic, and when it becomes acidic, majority of the fishes dies because of this. Another thing is that the land surface, because it is converted to acid, primarily because of the rain that is acidic, it will kill most of the vegetation, including the crops that we tend to plant in our fields. So as you can see, the impact of acid rain and the impact of nitrogen oxide present in the atmosphere does not only pollute the environment or the atmosphere primarily, but it also pollutes the land as well as the water that is present in our land. So what are the sources of this nitrogen oxide? We have vehicles, as what I've told you. Automobiles can also contribute, majority of which, 50%. Tobacco smoking, the same with carbon monoxide, including the extraction of gas and oil, can contribute to the emission of nitrogen oxide in the atmosphere. Natural sources from landfills, from farms that usually uses herbicides, pesticides, can also emit nitrogen oxide into the atmosphere, as well as other sources such as power plants, coal-fired power plants, and the like. Sulfur dioxide is also another gas that is considered to be colorless, irritating, and usually formed as a result of combustion from sulfur-containing fossil fuels such as coal and oil. The same with nitrogen oxide. Sulfur dioxide is also a major component of acid deposition, or commonly known in layman's term as acid rain, primarily because sulfur dioxide is or can be converted to sulfuric acid in the atmosphere. So this is also derived from power plants, coal power plants, which is the major culprit, including automobiles. Volcanic eruption can actually spew out or emit sulfur dioxide, including nuclear power plants. Lead. Lead is a solid toxic metal, and its compounds emitted into the atmosphere as a suspended particulate matter. So what are the sources of lead? Well, the major source of lead several years ago is automobiles, primarily because the emission of automobiles usually will also emit lead, because the main fuel that they use during those times are fuel that usually contain lead. And what is the effect of this? As the automobiles or engines function, the tendency is that the lead that is present in the fuel is being emitted into the atmosphere. And because of this, government now in all countries have pledged themselves to use unleaded gasoline in order to address the problem with lead. However, lead is not only emitted through automobiles, but they are also emitted in other forms, such as in urban soil waste, in melting and smelting ores, in industry, such as if you are going to melt or convert aluminum into a liquid state, gold, silver is being smelted. They also use lead in the process. Effluents from storage battery industry. Our batteries will contain lead. That is the reason why majority of manufacturers of battery are removing lead as part of their manufacturing process. Metal plating, finishing operations, fertilizers and pesticides can sometimes contain lead. Additives in gasolines, as what I've told you, that is the reason why all countries right now are using unleaded gasoline because of this problem. And chimney factories. Chimney of factories such as coal-fired power plants. Volatile organic compounds is another source of atmospheric pollutant. These are emitted as gases from certain solids or liquids derived from organic chemicals that are widely used as ingredients in household products. Take note of this. Meaning to say, you are using this kind of products, meaning to say you are also a culprit in polluting our air. So they release organic compounds even while not in use or even when you store this kind of household product. So what are the household products that are usually a culprit of volatile organic compounds? We have paints, paint strippers, and other solvents, wood preservatives, aerosol sprays, cleansers and disinfectants, including moth repellents and air fresheners, no, are also one of the sources of your VOC. Stored fuels and automotive products, hobby supplies, dry clean clothing, pesticides, other products including building materials and furnishings, office equipment such as copiers, printers, correction fluids, carbonless copy paper, graphics and craft materials including glues and adhesives, permanent markers, photographic solutions, industrial machineries, transportation including automobiles, motorcycles, and the like, and agricultural products such as what I've told you a while ago, pesticides. So that as a result, primarily due to volatile organic compounds which is emitted in the air, they also sometimes pollute our homes. The next part of the topic of the atmospheric pollutants are actually the indoor air pollutants. The indoor air pollutants are usually acquired from secondhand tobacco smoke. So if one of your family members is smoking, that is the reason why our government has implemented measures to safeguard our health from secondhand smoke. And we would like to commend the city government of Davao for initiating such action in order to prevent people from getting sick due to secondhand tobacco smoke. Because as what I've told you, secondhand tobacco smoke is also a source of an atmospheric gas pollutant such as carbon monoxide and nitrous oxide. Airborne mold and mildew, especially during the rainy season, are usually abundant, and sometimes when the mold and the mildew are usually present in the air, they can actually cause respiratory problems such as allergies of some sort. Pet dander can also be a contributor to indoor pollutants. Pet dander is actually a dandruff, no? Pet dandruff. So you might as well try to improve the hygiene of your pets by regularly bathing them from time to time, grooming them from time to time. Lead impregnated dust from old paints, some vinyl mini blinds can contain this lead, which can actually contribute to indoor air pollutants. Cockroach shedding can also be a source of indoor air pollutants. Dust mite particles Take note of this. These are usually found in our households. Combustion gases, no, released by stoves, heaters, candles, including fireplaces, are the sources of indoor air pollutants. So take note of the picture. These are the very things that is happening in our households. When we have pets inside our house, they can also contribute to indoor air pollutants, including the use of perfumes, secondhand smoke. Okay, so take note of the sources of indoor pollutants. And these are the things that you can do to reduce indoor air pollutants in your homes, such as never allow smoking indoors. That is the reason why I commend the city government of Davao for initiating actions against smoking in public places, including in public vehicles. Use of less toxic cleaning products. This is also one of the major contributor to indoor air pollutants. We use cleaning products such as sprayed products, Lysol, for example, fresheners. No, these are examples of cleaning products. We make certain that indoor space is properly well ventilated before we use the cleaning products, no, in order not to allow the gas to be trapped inside our homes. We reduce the presence of cockroach, including the dust, no, by cleaning our homes from time to time and seeing to it and assuring our family members that they are not infested with cockroach or dust mite. We reduce pet dander by allowing our pets to be groomed, to be bathed from time to time, and we avoid or minimize the use of pesticides indoors. Another thing that we can do is to use low toxicity paints or sealers, reduce the use of solvent-based dry cleaning and or air out dry clean clothes thoroughly before bringing into one's home, avoid idling your car if you are not traveling or if you are waiting for something, you turn off the engine. Lawn mower or forklift can also be a source because they also emit gases, excuse me. That is the reason why we also tend to minimize the use of these machineries if it can help us, especially when using this in enclosed spaces. Change air filters frequently, especially the filter of your air cons from time to time. So knowing all this, including the sources, what are the health effects of air pollution, whether indoor or outdoor? Well, the most common and immediate effect are usually when we inhale the gases, these pollutants. So, can mean that we suffer, or most people who inhale them every day can actually lead to respiratory illnesses or diseases. No? And sometimes the respiratory diseases or illnesses can lead to a more serious complication that can lead to even death, such as probably lung cancer, pneumonia, respiratory symptoms, asthma, allergic reaction, and aside from respiratory diseases, the most immediate health effects of air pollution is allergies of the skin. Because our skin is exposed to this type of pollutants, and every day we encounter them as we go out and do our activities from time to time. Therefore, we are exposed by inhaling them or by attaching these gases on the surface of our skin. So that sometimes people will suffer from various forms of skin diseases like eczema, allergy, contact dermatitis, and the like. Aside from that, there is prolonged effect of air pollution, such as the development of stroke, insulin resistance, especially in the formation of diabetes. There is what you call people suffering from high blood pressure, or even young mothers suffering from birth defects, primarily because of this. Or sometimes, as we encounter them for long periods of time, tendency is that we develop cardiorespiratory disorders, such as myocardial infarction, cardiac arrhythmia, and cardiac insufficiency. Okay? So that because we are fully aware of this, the best thing to combat this, to prevent this from getting into our system, is by protecting ourselves. And how do we protect ourselves? One of the most common forms of protection that we right now have considered to be a very important aspect of our lives nowadays because of the COVID-19 is the wearing of PPEs, specifically masks. So I suggest if you do not want to suffer from this type of conditions, medical conditions, as early as this point in time, you better train yourself to wear masks at all times when you go out and do your activities. Hopefully, you have learned from the topics on atmospheric hazard. The next type of hazard is water-related hazard. So water is an important resource. In fact, the planet is covered with 71% of water. Only 30% is made of land, or even less, because of the effects of climate change. There are two types of water that we use from time to time. We have surface water and groundwater. So surface water are actually being contaminated specifically in urban areas, primarily due to industrial and domestic waste. In rural areas, they are polluted because people use water for their own consumption as well as livestock. Groundwater, on the other hand, is being contaminated primarily because of the leaching effect of pesticides, herbicides, grease, automotive oil, and other forms of contaminants that may tend to percolate into the deepest part of the Earth's crust to contaminate the groundwater. As what I have told you, water is an important resource wherein, as you all know, all of us are experiencing limited supply of water nowadays. This is due to the increasing population and the increasing demand of the use of surface and groundwater. So, in order to prevent this from happening, by constantly polluting, we need to implement measures to protect our surface and groundwater from this type of hazards. So that water pollution is a common problem in areas of rivers, streams, bayous, lakes, ponds, estuaries, and bays, which includes polluting them with fertilizers from home lawns and gardens, as well as the agriculture use of these pesticides and herbicides. Mercury from power plants, including mining and industrial waste, can actually contaminate, no, our drinking water supply. Remember, our drinking water supply, no, is derived from surface water and groundwater. As what I've told you, we have limited supply of these types of water, primarily because majority of the water on the earth's surface is made up of salt water. So if you are going to estimate the total volume of water on our planet, comprising about probably 100% of the total volume of water, only 0.014% is what we utilize as surface and groundwater. This 0.014% is what is found in our rivers, in our streams, in our bayous, in our lakes, in our ponds, in our estuaries, and in our bays, which we usually utilize them for domestic purposes. So if we continue to contaminate them with all these things that I have mentioned, such as oil and other chemicals from roadway runoff, the tendency is there will come a time that we will not be able to use them domestically. And when that happens, probably that will be the end of the existence of life in this planet. Aside from that, water pollution is due to medications that come in contact with surface and groundwater, paints, and other toxic substances that are disposed down to the household sinks and toilets, including soap that we usually use, trash and sediments from construction sites, including pet waste, faulty septic tanks, runoff from industrial sources or sewage treatment plants, and hormones and prescription medication in human waste can contaminate our surface and groundwater. So what are the health risks associated with polluting our surface and groundwater? Remember, the health risk is that we drink them or we use them for washing, for taking a bath, and if the water is contaminated, then we also, in other words, contaminate ourselves. Eating seafoods from polluted rivers or bays can also contribute to the health risk associated with water pollution. Eating crops that are watered with polluted water can also become a health risk. And swimming in polluted waterways can also become a health risk associated with water pollution. So if we're going to use polluted water, the tendency is we also pollute ourselves. So these are the pictures of how we usually pollute our waterways. And in return, by polluting the waterways, the tendency is that we destroy the ecosystem. Okay? So, how do we mitigate or prevent water pollution? Well, for one, every city must have a water sewerage system. So look into that. What is a water sewerage system? This is used primarily, although they contribute to atmospheric pollution, but they are very important in order to minimize polluting our waterways. So take note of that. And this is the only way to prevent this from happening, just like what is being shown in the pictures. However, Davao City do not have a water sewerage system. That is a fact. And all of our waste usually goes directly to our waterways. I'm sorry to inform you about this, but that is the sad reality of our city. Foodborne hazard is another form of environmental health hazard. They can be a biological contaminant associated with poor domestic sanitation and hygiene arrangement. Biological contaminants contaminate our food products containing probably microorganisms. And one of the reasons that our food products are also contaminated primarily because of food handlers. Food handlers who do not observe proper sanitation procedure. Chemical contaminations are brought about by additives in the food that we are eating, or sometimes the food that we are eating that we consider to be fresh will be contaminated with pesticides, or probably the water that we are using is contaminated with chemical agents, as we wash the food or the vegetables that we are eating. So these are the major contributors. Food handlers who do not observe proper sanitation, who tend to prepare the food that we are eating, people who do not have access to proper or adequate sanitation procedure, usually disposes of their waste directly into the waterways, the use of pesticides and herbicides. So another form of hazard is vector-borne hazards. Vector-borne hazards are usually biologic agents that are found in the environment. So they are actually a part of the ecosystem where we are also living. So we live among them. And sometimes the vector-borne hazard can gain entry into our body and cause different types of illnesses, primarily because of our negligence to observe proper hygiene and sanitation practices. Take note of this. So these vector-borne hazards can also lead to this type of illnesses. So you have here your guinea worm, your elephantiasis. Mosquitoes are considered to be vector-borne primarily because they carry organisms that can actually be introduced into our body as they bite us or suck our blood. Take note of that. Food that are contaminated with such biologic agents can gain entry because we eat them raw, and that is the reason why we get sick. So proper observance of proper hygiene and sanitation practices can actually prevent vector-borne hazards from causing diseases. Another type of hazard is domestic hazards. Domestic hazards, such as in the case of indoor air pollution, as what I've told you from the word domestic, no? Meaning to say it is innate in us. It is in our own environment. That is the reason why domestic. And because of this, we often encounter this type of problems associated with overcrowding and poor living condition, such as in the slum areas, wherein sanitation is lacking because of the informal settlements. Waste handling is also lacking, associated with open waste dump sites, communities living on or regularly sorting through, no, such as in the waste sites. And I'm sorry to tell you that this is actually being experienced even in our own country. So take note of the picture. This is your open dump site. Children usually sort out garbage, no, in the dump site just to make a living. People living in crowded places can actually contribute to the development of diseases in this type of living condition. Now, these poor living conditions is actually brought about by socioeconomic factors, primarily because they do not have incomes to support themselves. Aside from that, ethnicity and sense of community also plays a vital role, primarily because they want to live together in one place, and that also contributes to crowded living. There are studies that tells us that society are disproportionately exposed to environmental hazards and may be more vulnerable to such hazards than other population because of crowded living condition, such as in the case of the slum areas. So that residents in low income are usually exposed to chemical waste dumping sites. They are exposed to electric power plants. They are exposed to municipal incinerators. They are exposed to solid waste landfills, industrial plants, and even they live in heavily traveled roadways, even near the railway or rail system, such as in the case in Manila, wherein majority of the people are living near or just beside the railroad. Okay, so I guess you are familiar with this type of conditions. You have seen this a lot in our society. And aside from that, we have hazards from waste also, which is also part of domestic hazards, such as how do we mitigate municipal solid waste, hazardous waste, and nuclear waste. No? Although we do not have nuclear waste in our country because majority of our power plants are usually powered by coal nowadays. Some are powered by gas. So municipal solid waste includes residential, industrial waste. Solid waste is usually disposed in landfills or even being recycled. Recycled is a problem, or recycling is a problem in our country nowadays, primarily because we do not have enough recycling plants. So tendency is that majority of our solid waste is still disposed in landfills. And there will come a time wherein we will have lack of landfills for our waste to be disposed of. So I guess one way to mitigate this is to reduce our waste. Hazardous waste are those that are defined as toxic, corrosive, flammable, that needs to be disposed properly. Corrosive, such as acids, flammable, such as gasoline, uh, toxic, such as probably chemical agents that are derived from household products. Once they come contact with other chemicals, they become toxic. Nuclear waste are usually waste that are derived from nuclear power plants but as what I've told you, We do not have nuclear waste in our country. Sources are commercial power plants, hospitals, non-military sources, including residential and industrial waste. Another type of hazard is infrastructure hazard. So what are infrastructure hazards? Infrastructure as being defined are basic equipment and structures such as roads, bridges, buildings, houses needed for social community to function properly. So infrastructure hazards such as traffic can lead to accidents, noise pollution, which becomes a growing problem in major cities in our country. Industrial, not only in our country, but in other countries as well. Industrial accidents are usually common, associated mainly with poor regulated chemical industries or poor training of employees, poor knowledge about the things that they are doing in their respective workplace. Contaminated lands. No? Contaminated lands are old industrial sites or lands that are usually used to dump waste. Okay? Or these are agricultural lands that are heavily bombarded with pesticides or herbicides that remains in the soil for quite some time. Okay, so take note of this, no? Infrastructure can lead to accidents, noise pollution, nuclear power plants can be very destructive, such as in the case of Chernobyl, wherein it will produce abnormal babies like this, and the dump site, which can produce, as we dump our rubbish or garbage from time to time in the landfill, they tend to produce gases such as nitric oxide, nitrous oxide, carbon monoxide into the atmosphere. Noise pollution. Noise pollution is brought up or is derived from sound. So a sound is heard when energy from vibrations which travels through air, liquid or solid media as a pressure wave is received by the ear. That is what you call a sound. A sound, when it becomes unwanted or an unpleasant sound, becomes a noise. And how do we determine whether a sound is a noise or a pleasant sound? The sound, as it travels as a wave, is measured and expressed through decibels. So, the measurement of the decibel will determine the loudness or the intensity of the sound volume, which is also referred to as the amplitude. So a sound can be a noise, take note of this, if it is more than 85 decibel. So a sound becomes a noise if it is more than 85 decibel. Okay? So usually, noise pollution is derived from traffic, trains, buses, lawn mowers, leaf blowers, and the like. The exposure of this sound that is very, very detrimental to the ear should not be higher than 85 decibels, as what I've told you, for long periods of time. Primarily because if you expose your ear to this type of sounds for long periods of time, it can lead to permanent hearing damage, such as this, such as this. Okay, so that the ear can accept a sound that is pleasant to hear when it is less than 85 decibels. Note of that. So that higher levels of sound have shown to cause stress, increase blood pressure, cause sleep disturbances, which actually affects sleep quality as well as mood and performance. So just imagine yourself allowing yourself to be exposed to loud sounds. Would you be able to sleep, or would you be able to have a quality sleep in such case? Especially if you are living near an airport, perhaps, or if your house is just alongside the highway, would you be able to sleep properly? Of course not. Okay, safety and health in the workplace. This is actually an added topic, primarily because I want to emphasize occupational injury and disease in the workplace. That according to the World Health Organization, there are more than 3.3 workers globally and is continuously growing. And approximately 85% of these workers are found in less developed countries, working in conditions that are considered to be hazardous. Each year, according to the WHO, there are 317 million workers experiencing non-fatal injuries, and 321 million workers are fatally injured. Take note of this. So according to their estimate, 1 million workers usually suffer from workplace injury, and about 1,000 usually suffer from injury, and sometimes the injury becomes fatal, which according to their estimate occurs every day. 1,000 workers die every day because of fatal injury. So aside from that, diseases acquired in the workplace sicken about 160 million workforce and kill an estimated 2.2 million workers. So take note of that. And this can lead to approximately $1.25 trillion lost from global economy. And what is the reason for this? Occupational injury and diseases. Number one, foremost to this is the lack of training. The lack of training, lack of education in the workplace can actually lead to fatal injury or accident. Second, the lack of personal protective equipment in the workplace can lead to diseases or can even result in injury or even death of the worker. So that, how do we define occupational disease? Occupational disease is any abnormal condition or disorder other than one resulting from an occupational injury caused by factors associated with employment. It includes acute or chronic illness that may be acquired through inhalation, absorption, ingestion, or direct contact, such as if you are working in a mine, for example, a coal mine, and you lack the necessary protective equipment. The tendency as you extract the coal, tendency is that you inhale the suspended particulate matter in the extraction of the coal, including dust. So what happens? In the earlier days, in the earlier part of century, a lot of people died in the coal mines, coal mines primarily because of inhalation, respiratory diseases. They develop some sort of respiratory diseases, lung cancer, because they tend to inhale the coal as they extract it from the mines. Occupational injury, on the other hand, is any injury such as a cut, fracture, sprain, or amputation, which results from a work-related event or from a single instantaneous exposure in the work environment, such as in our case, medical technologies. I often hear people who usually injure themselves from needle prick, primarily because they do not observe the proper operational procedure on how to extract and how to handle needles, syringes properly. So take note of that. Education, knowledge, proper training is important in order to prevent occupational disease and occupational injury in the workplace. So let's go on with climate change and environmental health hazard. Okay, so what is climate change? Climate change, over the ages, human societies have altered local ecosystem and modified regional climates. This is usually attributed to the natural atmospheric phenomena that we usually experience from time to time: volcanic eruption, earthquakes, storms, hurricanes. We are not new to this because our country are constantly being battered by storms and hurricanes. Climate and weather has a powerful impact on human health and well-being. That is the reason why we need to stay on our guard from time to time, safeguard our property from time to time. Whenever we hear news that there is a storm coming, we tend to help the government protect ourselves by making sure that we vacate the premises, especially in areas that are prone to calamities such as flooding, landslides, and the like. The recent rapid increase in population size contributes to climate change. The use of energy consumption, primarily because in the increase of population size, intensity of land use because of the increase of population size, the international trade and travel, and other human activities has an impact on health and population, which contributes to climate change. Take note of that. Abnormally high temperatures in Europe in the summer of 2003 were associated with at least 27 deaths. This is the health impact to climate change. Remember, there are two forms of climate change. Before I proceed to this slide, there are two forms of climate change. One is global cooling. The other one is global warming. In the earlier part of the century, as the earth was still developing into what we are living right now, there was what you call the ice age. And that is what you call the global cooling. Nowadays, because of the intense human activities, human population are increasing, therefore development are increasing, industries are sprouting everywhere, spewing a lot of gases into the atmosphere that contributes to the greenhouse effect of what we call right now global warming. Therefore, the health impact of the global warming or climate change that we are experiencing right now is the increase in deaths associated with heat stroke because of the intense heat. Climate change was estimated to be responsible in 2000 for approximately 2.4% of diarrheal diseases, 6% of malaria in the middle income countries. Take note of that. And global climate change is therefore a newer challenge to the ongoing efforts to protect human health. So you might be wondering, why malaria? Where is there an increase in malaria? Primarily because of human development. We want to use our land for creating communities, cities, building houses, bridges, and all these things. And what happens? By doing that, we destroy our forests. And once we destroy our forests, we destroy the ecosystem. We destroy the habitat. So, in order to survive, mosquitoes will tend to breed in the urban areas, increasing the number of dengue and malaria in our cities from time to time. That is the effect. Okay? So another thing, infectious diseases, as what I've told you, I have brought this up, no, will increase, and extremes, both heat and cold, can cause potentially fatal illnesses such as heat stroke, no, hypothermia, will increase death rates from heart and respiratory diseases. Others are food-producing ecosystems are usually diminishing primarily because we destroy our own ecosystem. We usually cut trees. We usually make use of whatever available land there is by filling them with soil, destroying the habitat of the creeks. We cover the creeks, we cover the rivers. There is a rising sea level from time to time. Therefore, flooding occurs in certain areas. In most part of the land areas are usually flooded, and when we flood them, it becomes a physical hazard and a land loss, contributing to economic disruption or sometimes civil strife. So take note of this, that because of our negligence, our own way of doing things, that tends to forget the importance of the environment. In return, we destroy our own environment. And these ones are what contributes to climate change. So other environmental health hazards brought about by climate change, take note of this: heat and humidity, due to the increase in temperature, stress because of the excessive increase to temperature, which also contributes to the decreased immune function and the increased risk of environmental related illnesses, as what I've told you. Therefore, we need to change our way or of doing things in order to be responsible and in order to survive. Hopefully, there are measures that we can implement to mitigate the effects of climate change. And I hope you come to realize that this is all we've got, our environment. And if we do not protect them, there will come a time that all of us will not be able to survive. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something. Good day.